So good afternoon. My name is Scott Hicks. I'm director of the Teaching and Learning Center at UNC Pembroke. I'm joined here today by Dr. Miko Nino of the Office of Online Learning and Dr. Joshua R. Eyler, who is the director of faculty development in the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning and lecturer of writing and rhetoric at the University of Mississippi. In his role as director of faculty development, he helps lead the University of Mississippi's QEP, Quality Enhancement Plan, focused on critical thinking. He earned his PhD in medieval studies from the University of Connecticut and has published on a range of topics including evidence-based pedagogy, technology in the classroom, and disability studies. The book that's the focus of this conversation, How Humans Learn, comes highly acclaimed. How Humans Learn is a splendid repository of ways to rethink how we teach college, the Los Angeles Review of Books states. So Josh, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Scott, for having me.
We're very pleased to have you. I just note here that we're going to be talking about your book on Friday. So if any of our listeners are interested in joining our book club, please email me directly and I'll be happy to add you to our group.
That's great. Thanks very much.
So we'll start here. How are you and your family and friends doing during the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, okay. Everyone's healthy, which is the main thing. And like everyone else in higher ed, we're just trying to roll with one disruption after another as it comes down the pike.
So you're saying that chaos is perfectly normal.
It is these days, anyway.
There is no abnormal, it's only just normal.
Right.
So how are your colleagues doing?
I think we have a range. I'd say about 30% of our classes have some face-to-face component, whether that's fully face-to-face or hybrid, and the rest are remote. So I think after the spring emergency transition, over the summer, there was some programming to help people become more comfortable with the technology, thinking through course design in a way that would make it easier to switch if there was some kind of disruption. So I think people are feeling, a little bit more comfortable and confident and prepared. But still, it's still a transition for many, and I think. So those who are teaching remotely are navigating those waters, and those who have some face-to-face component are now, I think, trying to navigate a classroom that's in masks and socially distanced, but then through disruptions caused by quarantines and isolation, things like that. So, okay, better than the spring, I think, is the moral of that story, with room to grow.
Always room to grow.
Right.
How's your institution faring? Are you facing any sort of pressures, budget cuts, those kind of things?
Well, we've had a small budget cut, but our enrollment looks pretty okay for right now. The institution is facing, I think, many similar pressures to a lot of public research universities. But it seemed, from my perspective, from my position within the university anyway, we're holding pretty steady at the moment. So that's a positive.
A lot of sort of responsibilities and obligations to keep in mind, even as we do our core functions.
Right. Absolutely.
What do you like most about your core functions, your work there in the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning?
Well, the thing that I've always liked the most about this work is getting the opportunity to connect with and work with faculty from across the institution, all different sorts of disciplines, different courses. I love hearing about the work they do. I love celebrating the great teaching that happens on any campus that I've been at. And I personally love learning about different strategies and different disciplines, which is part of what led to this book. And I think that process of learning, if nothing else, is evident in this book. That it should be probably one of the main takeaways is that it was a journey for me to learn about a lot of these different areas of research, and that was a lot of fun. And I found that part of it very valuable.
Well, speaking as a reader of your book, I thought it was a lot of fun to read. because I liked the sort of cognitive, psychological, neuroscience discussion that was then woven into what teaching and learning looks like in the contemporary university, and then sort of rounded out by takeaways and some actual applications of that theory or that practice to the classroom.
Well, I
So
appreciate that.
I saw a lot in your book about that curiosity. So it sounds like to me that where you begin the book with curiosity is sort of where the book itself began as something that you were interested in writing.
Absolutely, yes. And so it was driven very much by my own curiosity and by the curiosity I was observing in others. So when I first moved into the world of teaching and learning centers, I had a lot of catching up to do. I had been a tenured English faculty member. And so really was trying to work hard to move outside of my disciplinary context, and that meant reading a lot in the teaching and learning literature. It meant meeting with a lot of people from across disciplines. And as I was doing that, I just kept running into the same question over and over again, which was not what works, because we have a lot of information about what teaching strategies actually are effective. It was, why do some things work well in the classroom and others not so well? And it was that question, that curiosity about about finding answers to that question that would help me as a teacher and help those that I was working with, that really started me down the pathway.
I love that answer about what works and what works not so well and what works here but not there. There's so much to study there.
Right, definitely.
So you begin with that importance of curiosity, which you shows kicks off the learning process, both in our own work as scholars, but also for our students.
Yes.
And there's a quotation from page 36 that I like a lot. You write, "The role of the teacher is A, to help students learn how to maximize this ability to use questions to learn, and B, to then get out of their way." So as you see it, what does getting out of their way look like?
I think it can look like a lot of things. I think the what I'm driving at, kind of at its foundation, there is um, that the part of the goal of a solid college education should be to really help students to learn how to ask the right questions and how to follow those questions where they lead. And if we it that can be a kind of a process that is messy, it's uneven. Students make more or less progress on that in any given kind of semester. But it's a process that can't fully happen if we are overly committed, or I guess committed to overly directed instruction. And so I think when I say getting out of the way, it means that we have to sometimes let go of the control and let go of prescribed parameters for what learning looks like, in order to actually help students follow the pathways that those questions that they are discovering and using actually lead them to. So it doesn't mean kind of abandoning our purpose as teachers. Far from it. To the contrary, actually, it means thinking about our role as helping our students to find the tools that they need to approach these meaningful questions, and then to cultivate an environment where they feel safe to pursue those questions. In other words, that they're not going to be penalized for making mistakes right off the bat, that kind of thing. So where they feel safe to do that, and where they are supported in individualized kinds of ways in order to make progress on those questions.
So I think I heard in that answer three things that faculty members might not like, which is messiness, some chaos, and that some students might make more or less progress than other students, but progress still nonetheless is being made.
Right.
So those are, I think, are some of the things that we might struggle with. But I also liked your point about we might struggle with sort of over-directed instruction. That reminds me of D. Fink's work about significant learning
Mm-hmm.
that seeks to create the self-directing learner. So as I hear you talking about this question of curiosity, it's about letting the students thrive within their own curiosity and then supporting them with the tools that we know they need, but allowing them to use them. Does that make sense?
Yes, it absolutely makes sense. I think that's spot on. I particularly like what you said there at the very end, because I mean, if I think about myself, and if each listener thinks about him or herself, it's hard to pinpoint what we might be curious about with any given topic, or what might prime our curiosity about any given topic. And so, as faculty, we can't really overplan in terms of sparking that curiosity and priming that curiosity. What we have to do is establish a learning environment that cultivates curiosity, so that students can find their own way into a particular topic or question or activity, and find what it is that they are curious about. If I tried to make predetermined judgments about how to access or prime that curiosity, I may miss the mark for some students, because I am making decisions based on what I find interesting, not necessarily what the students in my class are going to latch onto.
And if we're planning our textbook orders 2 months in advance and building our syllabi 2 months before we meet our class, we don't even meet the individuals who will be curious with us.
That's true. That's very true. In many ways, our educational systems are set up to kind of, or at least the traditions are set up to sort of create obstacles to the kind of learning we're talking about here.
Built-in obstacles. But
Mhm.
as you know, we can design for curiosity. We can establish that learning environment that makes curiosity happen by design. And to go back to what you said earlier, you were interested not just in what works, we know that, but
Mhm.
when some things work well and others not so well, we can work from best practices. We
Yes.
can work from the best sort of ways or paradigms of thinking. And in your book, I think you help us do that from curiosity onward. So we can
Oh,
move to that next one too, if you're willing to do that. You talk about sociality.
right. Yeah, this is an area that I think is very important, especially now. I mean, it's always an important part of education, but especially now, and I'll explain what I mean in a second. Sociality is essentially just a term meaning that we are deeply social creatures. We're profoundly social beings, and that shapes every interaction that we have, and learning is a big part of that. So our social nature is evident in the ways that we learn, and the ways that we learn most effectively. And to the degree that we can, as faculty, draw on those social connections to maximize the learning taking place in our classrooms, the better environment we're creating for our students. When I say that I think is especially important now, it's because in this new world where in the spring we were forced to go into environments that people weren't prepared for, and now in many ways still are kind of isolated from each other. Paying attention to that social context and the social interactions is even more important to helping our students to feel a part of the learning process, and to really succeed in our courses.
You make a wonderful point there that sociality maybe is what we're beginning to miss the longer that COVID-19 and its changes impact us.
Yes, definitely. And I know um, we at my university put out some surveys, and I know that there were national surveys too at the end of the spring. And isolation kept coming up over and over again, not just for students but for faculty too. And we know, even beyond the realm of learning, we know from a lot of scientific research that isolation is just really detrimental to human beings because of our social nature. There's really interesting work to show what happens physically to us when we are deprived of social connection, and what happens psychologically to us as well. And so both of those things are certainly in play during a time when our ability to interact with other people is, there's obstacles to that. And so it's certainly having an effect on the learning that's happening in our classes.
I know you can't see me, but I'm nodding my head as you talk about isolation,
Right.
and not just something that our students feel, but something that all of us on our campuses, employees and students alike, are feeling.
Yes, definitely. Even the phrase that we're all using on a daily basis, socially distanced, it just captures the heart of what the problem is, right? Yes, we need to maintain that distance for the epidemiological purposes, but that same distance has negative repercussions for many other aspects of our lives. So we're in this kind of horrible paradox that with our health kind of battling between the two poles there.
And I'm thinking too, I hate that term social distancing. I would rather say physical distancing or something different.
Right, right,
We can
right.
be social in different ways.
Exactly. Just like we are right now, right? We're not physically close to each other, but we're talking.
We're communicating 3 states apart and able to share ideas with individuals that we've never done before in a way.
Yes, definitely.
So we're recalibrating our expectations, I guess, for what sociality might look like, and we're thinking maybe that beyond COVID-19, let's continue this kind of work, these kind of conversations through
Mhm.
screens. But once you're back in the classroom, let's say there's no COVID-19, how do you build a social classroom that has the sense of belonging, the classroom management philosophy that privileges community building,
Mhm.
and an instructor who effectively models intellectual approaches? That's a quotation from your book.
Right.
How do you do that in your own work?
Well, I've over the years have been drawn to the work that other folks in education have been doing for quite a long time, actually, in collaborating with students on classroom guidelines and policies. That's something that has struck me even before I started to do it myself and to write this book. But I think a lot of folks have success in building those social connections and developing that social classroom by working with their students to kind of create classroom compacts that talk about the guidelines for how discussions are going to unfold and how to use technology effectively. Often those are conveyed to students in terms of policy or edict, and so, but but if we kind of turn the tables on that and work with them, collaborate with them, it creates a different kind of social dynamic in largely positive ways. One of those is that students feel more invested in the learning community because they are coming up, they're being asked, they're being trusted to develop the norms for that community. And another way that I think is positive, uh, especially for those who might see this as a bridge too far, right? One positive attribute I think of this process is students actually take this very seriously, and they will begin to they'll begin to put social pressure on each other to follow the guidelines that they have established in ways that they might not feel the same kind of agency when they're asked to just follow certain kinds of guidelines or policies. So that's one way that I do it in my own classes now, and will continue to do it and build on. That was built on work that's been happening for quite a while. Uh, Others, though, the modeling. I think we talked a little bit about that with curiosity, but one of the hardest things that I have found that new instructors wrestle with is what happens when they don't know the answer to the question, or the fear of saying I don't know, as if we have to know every every single bit of information. That can be a difficult hurdle to clear. And so for the modeling, and especially when you think about things like curiosity and failure in the book, the model the thing that is probably the most beneficial modeling that we can do as faculty is when we run into something that we don't know, or someone asks us a question that we don't know the answer to say, I don't know, but here's how I would find out the answer to that question. So modeling the research process, modeling for students how to move through the process of trying to find an answer. I think that really helps to, again, create a kind of trust within the learning community, but to show students that what matters is not so much being able to remember every single fact, but what really matters is knowing, getting the tools and knowing how to find answers when necessary, to how to approach complex problems. So those are some of the ways that I think we can create that kind of social interaction. And then, there are other tried and true ways, like effective class discussions, good questions to lead those discussions, collaborative assignments that ask students to work together on meaningful questions, open-ended questions where they have to rely on each other to develop the knowledge. They can't just kind of break the assignment into 4 parts and each take an individual piece and do it. So there are other strategies there too, but in terms of the social classroom, those are some of the things we can do.
What I hear you saying too is that the curiosity brings us together, and all of us, students and faculty, need to express that curiosity proudly in the room.
Yes.
And then that sociality can help us make sense of what we learn, that it's not just facts we're learning, but it's facts that matter to others and matter to others in different ways or diverse ways. I like too your notion of sort of modeling the research process, for example, or sharing open-ended questions as opposed to sort of the yes or no questions or multiple choice that we might think about.
Right.
All of these things sort of build on our conversations with one another.
Absolutely, they do. Yes.
And I enjoy too seeing the ways that my colleagues are putting these things into practice online by using collaborative annotations, for example. They're able to have those conversations with students and to be curious with them on the very pages they're reading. So there's wonderful ways that we're doing this both online and in person as well.
And I'm glad you brought up the collaborative annotation. I think that it's something I've been recommending a lot to faculty at my own institution for that very reason, to make those collaborations and connections more dynamic than maybe a basic discussion board can do, that you can actually interact with the work and with each other in the same space.
It seems to me too that the discussion board then gets to be about bigger questions.
Right.
We've
Right.
sort of taken care of the details on the collaborative annotations, and now we can think bigger and better questions and be curious about big implications.
Definitely. That's a great point.
These are some things that, as I've been working these last couple semesters in person, transitioning to online, the things that I want to continue, I think, beyond whatever COVID-19 looks like in the future.
hmm Yeah, and I hope that that is an outcome of all of this. That, and I know that some faculty have told me this, that they found a really great tool or a really great strategy in making these kinds of transitions that they hope to keep with them when they return to face teaching. That something like hypothesis or perusal would be an additional element to their face-to-face teaching that they wouldn't have discovered otherwise.
And they're working because they make us curious too, I think, to go back to that faculty member having to be curious as well and to show that.
I agree with you.
So when I read your book, the chapter that I found most challenging, most thought-provoking to wrestle with for myself was your chapter on authenticity, because it makes me think about what seems inauthentic in education today. So I'll just share here, our university, for example, is an institution committed to access, and our students come from some of the most under-resourced high schools in North Carolina and some of the most persistently impoverished counties in the country. So I really paused when you wrote the following from page 169. You wrote, quote, authenticity is a basic requirement for deep learning, and it stands to reason that students who have experienced largely inauthentic environments will benefit just as much or more from exposure to these contexts than peers who have previously encountered them. Could you say more of what you're thinking and expressing there?
Sure, and actually, I had to go back and read that page when I saw you when I got the draft of the questions, and I thought, okay, let me make sure I know what it was that I was saying on this page.
Words and
So,
interpretations change over time.
right. And part of what I'm saying there is derived from my experience at the beginning of my career teaching English at Columbus State University, which is a regional comprehensive university in the Georgia system. And I the authenticity here means mirroring as much to what the greatest extent possible in the learning environment, either real world application and or using the tools and strategies and methodologies of scholars in the discipline. And the sentiment that you pinpointed there is really connected to larger work that we know of on opportunity gaps in educational systems. That students from secondary schools with fewer resources, with fewer books, more teacher turnover, etc., often find when they move to higher education what scholars call an opportunity gap. That they have not had an opportunity to practice certain skills, or they haven't been exposed to certain teaching strategies. And so when they are in particular courses especially gen ed courses early in their college career, they are often labeled as underprepared and judged by the system as not being ready or not being committed or something like that. When that could be, it's far from the truth. The truth is that those students are getting penalized because they didn't have the same kinds of opportunities as other students in their secondary education. And so strategies like the kinds of things we put under the rubric of inclusive teaching practices, strategies like collaborative versus competitive pedagogies, those can help students bridge those opportunity gaps and succeed in college. And so what I'm saying about authenticity here is a part of that conversation, that some students may have never had the opportunity to say, work with primary documents or work out in the field. I use this example in the chapter that memorizing the names of bugs is an inauthentic activity compared to going out into a field and trying to identify those bugs, because that's what an entomologist would be doing in the real world. So those who have never had classes where they were asked to engage in those activities will benefit as much, if not more, than being exposed to those practices than someone who already has, right? And so, in other words, authentic learning environments are an inclusive teaching practice that help students really find their way to success in higher education.
Authenticity welcomes the full human being who is the student into the classroom.
Yes, definitely.
And I like that point about deep learning. And to my mind, deep learning is not just that you check off all the goals and objectives for a course, but that you learn them in a way that's meaningful to you.
Yes, absolutely. And the meaningful to you, I think, is at the core of what I'm trying to articulate in the chapter on authenticity. It has to be meaningful. You have to see the reason why it would be meaningful to you. You have to see how you can use it. And that use can be theoretical. It's not like everything has to have kind of a practical application. It can be simply, this helps me to understand something better. But it does mean that students have to see how it matters and how to use it as well. But the personal connection there, the investment in the discipline or the class, I think, is at the heart of authenticity.
To go to that sort of larger goal beyond the university, the public good goal, perhaps, to create individuals who can live as they wish to live because they've learned deeply.
Right.
I
Definitely.
love that point about authenticity. The next chapter you talk about is about failure. It sort of, I think, draws off of that authenticity chapter because, one, we need to rethink what failure is and what it means.
Right.
Uh, in that next chapter, you talk about both the neurological and the social. You talk about failure as opportunity. You talk about mindset theory and grit theory. One of the things you write on page 200 is biological reality of learning is true regardless of whether the neuronal network represents accurate or inaccurate knowledge. We
Hmm.
can only build on existing networks. We cannot change the fact that such networks exist in the first place. And you say too that that's liberating as you think about failure. Could you tell us why that's liberating?
It is. It's liberating because nothing is more frustrating as a teacher than trying a number of different ways of, of trying to explain why something is wrong and not making any headway. And
Hmm.
so the for me, it's liberating because if I understand the biological reality of knowledge, the biological basis of knowledge, I can immediately see that, okay, you can't erase prior knowledge. You can't erase these networks. All you can do is provide opportunities. If we're thinking biologically, provide opportunities for those networks to weaken. If we're thinking kind of more from a metaphorical point of view, having students confront the failure of their prior knowledge or the failure of the conceptual model that they're bringing in. And so, as a teacher, I no longer have to invest my time in trying to find different ways to say no. That's incorrect. This is the truth, right? This is the facts that scientists work with. What I can invest my time in is designing activities and opportunities where students are confronting the failure of that model, or the just being confronted with scenarios or cases where their previous concept of an issue or a topic or an idea doesn't align, and so they have to recalibrate their understanding.
So it's a matter too of saying not that students are failures, but what
Right.
they have learned or what they have been taught to learn may not have been appropriate or right for the moment.
Right.
And also, it reinforces curiosity. Students might want to ask themselves, why did I learn this when I should have learned that?
Hmm.
I think it
Definitely.
really opens up a lot of curiosity, a lot of sociality to learn from other people, a lot of ways to put new networks into place.
It
That,
does. Absolutely, it does. And it's that's a challenging thing, though, and so this kind of ties in with several of the other chapters. It's a really challenging thing to ask students to do, because sometimes being confronted with, oh, wait a minute, I've believed this thing for a really long time, but it doesn't seem to work here. That can be an emotional, psychological kind of difficulty as well. I lead a program here on critical thinking in gen ed courses, and we are trying to pay a lot of attention to how difficult emotionally and psychologically the process of becoming a critical thinker can be. That part of what you're doing is asking students to unlearn some things that they may have learned, or to think about ideas that are very challenging for them on a number of different scales, and that's a hard thing to do. It's not just about the learning. It's about all the emotional components of that process as well.
and I can imagine as a student, I can't imagine thinking that if I unlearn something, I can do well in something. I have
Right.
to redefine what failure might look like.
Hmm.
And then to do that across what, 5, 10 gen ed courses the first year
Right.
in all sorts of disciplines, all different methodologies, that's pretty intense what we asked them to do that first year.
It is. It really is.
I like then your point about you discuss Carol Dweck's work on mindsets and Angela Duckworth's work on grit, but you foreground what Anindya Kundu says in advocating for teaching agency to students.
Hmm.
You quote him, you say, like grit, agency requires action, but considers one's ability to act and create change without glossing over structural inequalities. Agency is not an individual trait. Schools, groups, and communities can organize to grow agency for collective interests.
Right.
So as you think about authentic teaching and learning that is motivated and enriched by the cultivation of collective agency, what do you
Hmm.
envision? What do courses or classrooms look like? What do institutions look like?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a good question. So I think there are a couple parts there. One is one of the reasons I'm really drawn to that work on agency is because a dominant criticism of models like mindsets and grit is that they rarely take into account the socioeconomic uh, conditions under which it may be possible for some students to have grit and others struggle to do that, right? And so his model of agency then really looks at those systems and structures, and that we all need to kind of play a role. And when I think about higher education and I think about the systems of higher education, what that means for me is that we all have different parts to play within a system that kind of cultivates agency and cultivates that community response to structural inequity. There are things that individual faculty can do, like create more inclusive classrooms, like utilize the evidence-based pedagogies that we know help to mitigate some of those structural inequities, like building social classrooms that focus on belonging. So there are things that individual faculty can do, but there are also things that faculty by themselves cannot do that require work at the department level, like looking at curricular bottlenecks. What are the DWF rates in our intro courses in any one semester or any one department or major, and let's look at which students are getting those unproductive grades, and what can we do as a department, as a unit, to help with that process. But it also is the institution, right? What is the institution doing, and how can it better support faculty and departments in that work? What are the values and the commitments on the part of the institution to making higher education, making their institution, higher education by extension, more open, inclusive, accessible places for students to grow and to succeed. And so I think if we look at agency in higher education, it's an interplay. It really is that community that you were kind of pinpointing there, and how each part of the community needs to be focused on what that particular part or sector can do in order to advance those goals.
And to go back to your book in a way, the frameworks you present here, perhaps it's the institution's job to grow agency for curiosity and sociality, emotion, authenticity, all of these things that you conceptualize in the book.
Mm-hmm.
You could
Yes,
look like a very different institution, I think, along those lines.
right. I think yes, I think so too. I mean, um, I I think that an institution has a very definite role to play in communicating to students the value of and purpose of being in college. I understand the economic realities of higher education. I understand why certain messages are sent, and I also understand that students need to have fun as well. And so it's also okay for there to be other activities. I'm in no way am I saying the only purpose of college should be learning. But what I am saying is that I think institutions have a definite role to play and can do a better job about communicating to students what is the value, meaning, and purpose of a college education. Why are you here? How can we help you cultivate some of those areas that you were talking about and that are in the book? And how can we support the people who work in the institution to help students achieve their goals in those areas as well.
In other words, we've admitted you, we're going to make a full commitment to each other to see
Yes,
you through, no
yes,
matter where that
absolutely.
takes you.
Right, definitely.
I like too your chapter on emotion. You pinpointed enthusiasm as one of the most underestimated teaching tools at our disposal. And you emphasize that the single most important strategy we can use to help our students succeed in our courses is to care about them as students and as human beings. And I'm
Mhm.
asking this now because I hear in this discussion of authenticity and what rethinking failure might look like as opportunity, that we're taking enthusiasm for all that we're experiencing in college, inside the classroom, outside, and we're applying it to the way we do what we do.
Yes.
When you see enthusiasm in practice, when you see enthusiasm happening, what does it look and feel like? How does it affect you as an observer?
Right. I think there sometimes, and so I'll come around this from a different direction. Sometimes enthusiasm looks like a classroom with a lot of energy. That the faculty member has a lot of energy. The students are buzzing. It's just you can feel what's happening in that classroom. But I don't want anyone to think that enthusiasm only means energy, because there's some, a lot of this has to do with being true to who we are and our personalities as faculty too, and so that kind of environment just doesn't always fit with every faculty member. So enthusiasm is sometimes energy, but it is always a communication to students that you genuinely love what you are talking about, your discipline. There has to be a reason why we went into this in the first place, right? That we were that we were drawn to whatever discipline we're in for some reason, and that we can communicate that to students. But also, not just that, but also communicating to students that we really value their presence in our classroom, that we are there to help them succeed, to help them build meaningful lives, which is really what I think the purpose of a college education is. And that we, as you quoted there, it's probably the most important part of the book, that we communicate to them that we care about them as learners and as human beings. And that does not require any breaking down of any kind of professional decorum. I sometimes get questions about that. It doesn't. It simply means that students feel valued. They feel like an important part of the learning process and the learning environment, and they feel that we are there to help them, and we are committed to doing that.
Make a point in the book that our cognitive development, we sometimes mirror what other people do. When
We
someone
do.
drinks a glass of water, we get thirsty. And I think that enthusiasm in that way is contagious, as you're saying.
Hmm. Yes, and I think anecdotally, that's a comment that I think we see on on student feedback a lot, right? Of some of the best professors, that they often say that that kind of enthusiasm was contagious. And another version of that comment that I love and have seen often, or heard often, is that students will say, I wasn't really sure about this course or this discipline or this subject, but that person clearly cared a lot about it, and so I really wanted to figure out why, right? And so there's something just intrinsically powerful about communicating that to students, and I think part of it connects the emotional component to the social component. That this is a way in which we are expressing to each other the value of being together in some environment to talk about this particular subject.
And we can still be authentic that things aren't going right now the way we want them to go.
Hmm.
We can still be enthusiastic about what we do and the people that we're struggling through things alongside.
Yes, absolutely.
It's a powerful emotion, I think. And I do love that chapter about enthusiasm and emotion, that we learn to read the room in a different way, whether it's virtual or in person, and that we respond to other people as human beings, not in a hierarchy, but
Hmm.
as partners, curiosity.
Yes, and I think that certainly wasn't something that was taught in graduate school, to me at least. The empathetic, emotional component of teaching, but it was something that once I embraced that approach to teaching, made the work so much more meaningful and powerful and valuable just for me alone to see us all in that classroom as individual human beings who were together for a moment in time to do this work together and to figure out what it meant for us and what it would mean for us going forward.
You've built new neuronal networks, in other words, right? From grad school to now.
Right, I certainly have, right? And that's one of the reasons I love this line of work, the teaching and learning world. I'm always learning, and that's probably what drove me to higher education in the first place. And it's a way to continually kind of refresh that.
And you're learning not only the concepts when you visit these different classrooms, but how they're communicating, how they're showing their enthusiasm, their
Yes,
authentic selves. It's an
yes,
amazing role to be in.
it really is. It really is.
I've got one last question, then I'll check the chat in case there are any questions there from our listeners.
Okay.
So we're going to wrap up. If you would share with us what you've seen to be the ongoing impact of this book. What have you learned about its impact on readers, or how has it influenced the development of faculty as the kinds of mentors and models that we need right now in higher ed?
Yeah, good question. I think I've seen or I've heard from folks who have been reading it and drawn to it and using it in a number of different ways. I guess if I had to kind of pick one particular area where I have at least seen the most attention paid, it would maybe be the failure chapter. That and particularly the links between teaching, providing low stakes opportunities for students to try things out, make mistakes, and get feedback, and in ways that they're not kind of penalized for. The connection between that and what I say about grades has there. I've seen and heard from a lot of folks who are kind of playing around with new ideas, ways to lower the stakes, ways to communicate that it is, in fact, we are here to try out things, to kind of take intellectual risks, to utilize that curiosity, and have found a number of different approaches to trying some of those avenues in their classes. And I really think that's kind of independent of the book. That discussion about failure and about the need to give students more agency and more opportunity just to try out ideas without being evaluated all the time. That's kind of that's a big future direction. It's an underexplored area that we need to pay more attention to, and I think we see it popping up in kind of a number of different areas. One of which is the attention being paid to alternative grading models. Now, I think that we see a lot of people talking about different ways they're experimenting there. But I do think that it is so important for the future of education.
We can all work together. Low stakes is wonderful for faculty too. We can try out some things and they may not work, and we can work with our students to make things right.
Right, exactly.
Low stakes is good for all of us.
Definitely.
So I want to thank you again. Is there anything you'd like to say to wrap things up?
I just appreciate the time and thanks for the invitation and for your support of this book, and best of luck with your semester.
Thank you. So for our listeners, I would like to say that we'll be discussing this book on Friday. If you'd like to join us, please let me know by email. The book is How Humans Learn: The Science and Stories Behind Effective College Teaching. Our guest today has been Joshua Eyler, and the book is published by West Virginia University Press as part of its Teaching and Learning in Higher Education series. Josh, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Take care and have a wonderful semester.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.